What's up, guys? Another tip for you today. I just wanted to show you something you can kind of do to combat the blossom end rot or keep your vegetables, mainly squash, from having blossom end rot. So I got some squash here. Well, I got a lot of squash here, but I'm gonna go through all these. And what I'm doing is, one, I'm probably gonna pick some of these bigger ones. That squash is probably 8 inches long or more. That would make a nice little side dish for a meal for one. If you want a meal for two, you probably better let it get a little bigger, a little thicker, probably more like 12 inches, depending on how hungry you are. I like to eat. So what I'm looking for though is, which I don't know if this one has any. Yes, there's an example over here. Okay, this squash here, you see how the blossom is on the end there? And the blossom is obviously past its prime. It's done. It's not needed anymore. It did what it needed to do. And it's starting to rot, okay? The end of the squash is not rotting. There's no rot yet on the end of the squash, but the blossom has, been past its prime, and it probably will fall off soon. But what you can do to help the process is just grab this blossom. Should come right off real easily. All right, should pluck right off. I'm just going to dispose of that, throw it off to the side. And what that's going to do is, you're going to see, plucked right off. That's going to keep the rot from the blossom moving to the squash. Now, a healthy squash will not have the issue of rotting even if you don't remove the blossom, all right? So normally, you don't have to do that necessarily, and the squash will be fine, all right? Like this one here is all right. The blossom's not really rotting yet. I'll probably come in a couple days and pick it off. I don't necessarily have to do this, but it's definitely gonna help the squash from rotting, okay? Like there's one here. Normally that blossom will just rot off on its own and fall to the ground, but I don't want it to end up rotting my squash, so I'm just gonna go ahead and in there and just pop that off, all right? Now you wanna wait till they're kind of like this, till they're way past their prime. What you don't wanna be doing is, you see this one, okay? See that one's still kind of yellow on the end. It's still got some life left. It's not really rotting. I don't necessarily wanna pluck this off. It probably would pluck off fairly easy, but you don't really necessarily wanna be plucking that off. All right, you wanna wait a little bit longer until it starts to deteriorate a bit, and then you can pluck them off. Like I said, if you get some heavy winds or the squash are healthy and doing fine, you won't really necessarily have to do that. There's a bigger squash there. You won't necessarily have to do that because they will fall off on their own, but this is just something to kind of help you out if you're having a lot of wind and rain. Little slug there, taking care of my leftovers. This will help you out if you have a lot of water, if your environment is, gonna have your squash prone to blossom end rot. This will help you out, all right? This is gonna, because this squash here, that one might have rotted had I not removed that, all right? It's gonna help you out, it really is, all right? I used to not pull the ends off at all, and I had plenty of squash, there's another one. I had plenty of squash that didn't have blossom end rot that were just fine. But when I started to do this, it definitely preserved the squash a lot more. Okay, I'm not losing really any squash to blossom end rot. The only squash that I lose to blossom end rot, if I do lose any, are going to be the very small squash, and it's going to be true blossom end rot. So what I mean by true blossom end rot is I don't mean the blossom. That's a nice squash blossom there. Those are also edible. The true blossom end rot is, if I can find one, I'll show you, but I usually don't have the issue. A very small squash, when it first starts to form, or when the fruit is very small, what'll happen is the fruit itself, when it's tiny, will start the blossom end rot. The squash itself will rot before your blossom really falls off, and it won't be very big. All right, the squash will start to rot before it gets big. If your squash is already getting quite big, you shouldn't have any blossom end rot when the blossom starts to rot. Once again, this will just kind of help you out. So that's really true blossom end rot, is when your fruit is small, still has the blossom's rotting and rotting the fruit. All right, the blossoms will rot off. That's not necessarily blossom end rot. It's just the blossom deteriorating, getting rid of itself. Once again, a healthy fruit won't have a problem dealing with that. So there's your little tip on your squash plants. All right, guys. As always, thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.